Hey everyone, it's Rich. I'm here with Dorie Clark. We are at Deloitte University and we are doing the core leadership program. I'm coming back as an alumni and she's coming back for the 21st time or something like that to talk. And when I say to talk, I mean she is delivering some unbelievable guidance to transitioning service members, and having been through it 3 years ago, it resonated with me so much more now because I've learned so much in the 3 years since. And I feel like your ability to understand leadership, transitioning service members, and how it all integrates in society is second to none. And I was really happy to be back with you.
Thank you, Rich. Well, I'm so excited to hear about all the things that you've done in the past 3 years. You've had some great adventures for yourself.
It's been crazy. I had some good success at Amazon in operations. Before that, I was doing some sort of recruiting consulting job that was just absolutely not a good fit. And now I'm doing things like this. I'm unbelievably passionate about leadership development. So when you were talking, I was like, when I see or hear someone who speaks my language, it is like you're just like a magnet. But I want to get back to something before we talk about the real stuff. In 3 years since I last saw you, you had Reinventing You. Okay, her book, Reinventing You, fantastic book, and I have one piece of it I want to talk about. But since then, a lot of different things have happened. Can you tell us what it is? Because I actually didn't believe it when people were telling me.
Well, I've done a variety of different things, I guess, in the past 3 years. So if we're going from, like, say 2015,
sure.
So my second book, Stand Out, was released, and then in 2015, and then my third one, Entrepreneurial You, came out in 2017. I started some hobbies.
Yep.
So I was a producer on a jazz album that ended up winning a couple of Grammys, which was really exciting. Yeah. And I entered a program to be trained in writing musical theater, and along with it, I started investing in Broadway productions.
Yes. And you're here a few times a year, and you're everywhere. I see you on LinkedIn just doing so many things. And I think when Terry introduced you earlier, he's like, don't say there's something you can't do. What makes you just continually look for challenges? And I mean, let me just reframe that question. Reinventing You is about building a personal brand. And from the time I saw you last to now, building your personal brand is something I think a lot of people are more familiar with now than they were then, and the importance of it. So Reinventing You is about discovering that and honing it in. What makes you continually reinvent yourself? Because you're successful. Like, what's going on?
Well, thank you. I'm someone, Rich, who always has kind of gotten a little bit bored with the status quo. Like, I'm interested in a lot of things. I like to do a lot of things. And so for me, actually, I think there's a couple types of people. I mean, there's sort of the specialists who just have their thing and they love to do their thing. Yeah. And, God bless them, because things are a little bit easier for them at the outset because it's just super clear what they want to do, and therefore you can kind of reverse engineer the path to do it. The other type of person, which I kind of fall into, is maybe the more generalist, where I'm interested in a bunch of things. And there's that's great, of course, but there's a challenge at the beginning because you don't necessarily have enough depth of expertise in any one thing, or you're not really willing to commit to any one thing because it's like kind of cutting off your arm. It's like, oh, but I want to do this other thing. And so for me, what I realized, the way that I was able to make peace with that, to make peace with being a generalist, is that I realized, okay, it's not that you have to permanently resign yourself to only doing one thing. Yeah. What you need to do is just say, I'm going to do one thing now. And then later, even not even that much later, 6 months later, you can revisit it and say, okay, do I have bandwidth to add something else on, or can I retire that and move on to something else? And the idea that I didn't have to give up everything for life, it was just a question of focus and prioritization, made it okay for me to be able to specialize enough to really gain traction.
I am so glad you say that, because I would fall in category number 2 as well. And because we're here with transitioning service members or people who are now newly veterans, one point I want to make when I have the fireside chat is it is absolutely okay to be curious. I think it is not. I'm sure there's a very large percentage of people who may be looking for another job within a year, or because maybe the culture wasn't right, maybe the location wasn't right, maybe they realize I am not as in love with operations as I thought I was, and maybe I found a new talent. What is your take on the reluctance to pursue other curiosities? Because I think that we feel like we need to get something right away or it's over.
Yeah, I mean, culturally, there's a lot of pressure around it because there's a real stigma around being a dilettante, or just someone who likes to try little things, and it's like you're a hobbyist or something. Mm-hmm. And everybody, especially someone coming out of the service, they desperately want to be like, no, I'm serious. I can really do this. You feel like you have something to prove. Yeah. And so you don't want to be perceived as just, kind of flitting around from one thing to another. Mm-hmm. But, there's a process, and we have to recognize that and respect it. I mean, it would basically be like saying to every 15-year-old, okay, whoever you're dating right now, you're going to have to marry them. It's just like, we all know that would be a terrible idea. Yeah. And so, hopefully we can begin to make smarter and better informed choices. If you're a transitioning veteran, there's a lot of things you can do as kind of pre-work, whether it's doing tons of informational interviews, reading a bunch, job shadowing, all kinds of things. The more information you can gather, the more refined your choices can be. And so you don't actually necessarily have to take the job in order to discover that you either love it or you don't love it. But we have to be forgiving of ourselves that sometimes our best hypothesis it's not going to pan out. You need to understand that your judgment and your acumen is going to get more and more refined as you try different things and experience different functional roles and different corporate cultures.
I completely agree. When it comes to reinventing yourself, for you, everything we talked about in your last 3 years of success, whoever was not at her presentation earlier, let's talk about a few of the things you did before that. You started as a journalist. Then what did you do?
After I was a journalist, I worked in politics. I was a spokesperson on political campaigns. Yep. And then I ran a nonprofit for a few years. Okay. And, I had different things in there. Once I started my business, I actually did kind of some random things as parts of it. I made a documentary film.
Oh, nice. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, but for the past 12 years now, I've had my own business doing this kind of very broad combination of writing and speaking and consulting and teaching.
Now, you jokingly said earlier that when you were asked a question about reinventing yourself, you said some of it was just due to just failure. And now it's kind of on the success side. It's the opposite side. So what would you say to people about learning how to not be afraid of failure and to hone it? Because I very much now believe I'm in a place where trying to have a positive experience could lead to a negative experience, and embracing negative experiences could actually lead to a positive outcome. So what would you say about people afraid of failing, even though for you it's obviously worked out for a lot of us?
Yeah.
So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, you're right, Rich. I mean, I'm sort of half joking and half not joking with the failure piece, because early on, I got laid off from my newspaper job. I worked on these political campaigns and they lost, and so not that it was completely my fault that it lost, but nonetheless they were losing campaigns, and I had to keep coming up with other things. But I think that one key tenet that I have that I think makes the question of failure a little bit easier is it is so common, unfortunately, even for really smart, really good professionals, that when there is a setback of some kind, they are often very liable to blame themselves for that. And it's just this kind of internal, like, oh, is this, the validation that maybe I was wrong, maybe I made a bad move, maybe I'm not good enough or whatever. And that can be, extraordinarily painful to go through. And so one of my mantras, which I'll state it in the extreme because I think sometimes people need it in the extreme, is I like to say, blame out, not in. I think that too many people are just taking the judgment of the world or these external circumstances like, okay, a political campaign, it's a referendum on a lot of things. It's probably not a referendum on Dorie Clark. My name was not on the ballot. But, a lot of people really take that to heart. Instead, I like to say, no, we need to push back on that. And if someone is turning down your writing submission, which I've had happen many times. If someone is turning down your job application, if someone is turning down your internship application when you're willing to work for free, which has happened to me many times, what I like to say is, what's wrong with that person? What is so wrong with them that they can't see this? And I feel like you have to lean into that, because if you don't, it's so destructive if you turn it on yourself. Instead, you have to just be like, you know what? They're obviously idiots, and I'm going to go find some people that are not idiots.
I think you're so right, and I would really love to do some public speaking. So I reached out to a couple of Marine friends that I saw had some transitioning seminars, and I'm like, hey, I'm really trying to gear this up. Like, I don't think it'd be a good fit. I'm like, it's a transitioning service members. You're a Marine, you're my bud, man. Like, what's going on? And then I just, what would have taken me 2 weeks to get over, now that I've kind of changed the narrative in my head that it's not me, like, all right, sucks for you guys.
Yeah.
It took me 2 hours to get over. And I'm like, on to the next.
Totally.
So it's, and the thing is, kind of like what you're mentioning is, we tell ourselves these stories that are just not true. And I think that's really important for veterans to understand. And you said it at the very beginning. Please tell me the name of the helicopter pilot again.
Yeah, Toby Johnson. I wrote about her in my book, Reinventing You.
I was an attack helicopter pilot as well. I had an MBA from USC. I had 2 undergraduate degrees. I'm a first-generation American. I'm slightly bilingual. I love to talk. I'm good with people. And I've had a lot of no's. It could be perfect. Everything about you on paper could be perfect, but sometimes it's not transferable to the other side. Can you talk about that and why it's a challenge and how we can overcome it?
Yes, and sorry, when you say it's not transferable to the other side, which other side?
The hiring side.
Oh,
right. So it's not that they might not have the time or inclination to try and translate your experience into something that could benefit their firm or that position.
Right.
And you kind of flip it and you're saying, well, there's things that, they can't do that, or you've done that they will never do. But again, it's intimidating. So what do you have to say about that and the fact that they might not be able to understand what we did?
Yeah, it's a really important point, Rich, because these days, ever since Vietnam, ever since we shifted away from the draft, it's just a limited slice of the American public that has served in the military. And so statistically, the people who are hiring transitioning military veterans probably are not veterans themselves. And so, we all know every company, every industry, every world has its acronyms, it has its culture, it has its sort of special and specific knowledge, and that is really true in the military. The things that make perfect sense if you're talking among other service members, if you're trying to tell that story to a civilian, you're 2 sentences in and they're like, wait, what? Yep. What are all these letters? What are all these numbers? What does that mean? And also the nature of the job that a lot of people do in the military, for many positions, like being an attack helicopter pilot. If you're not a creative person, it's not immediately apparent how that can transfer into the corporate world. It's like, yay you, but what are you going to do now? And so it's on us. We can't be expecting everyone to make that translation and to learn about our culture, like a military culture.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be amazing if every person was committed to learning about every other person's experience. That would be amazing for humanity. But people are busy, they're lazy, they're pulled in a million directions. And so if somebody doesn't really know a ton about how things are in the military and they're not necessarily super motivated to go out and do it, we can't just rely on them to figure it out for us, because otherwise we're going to be out of luck. We have to learn how to tell the story in a way that makes sense to them, which means understanding enough about their world, about the corporate world, to say it in a way that breaks through and they say, oh, wait, I get it. I see how that would be relevant.
I think it's a really tremendous point that there is an inherent responsibility that sometimes we overlook, because, I mean, I might be exaggerating, but sometimes I feel like veterans have a small sense of entitlement where, like, hey, I did some amazing stuff, like, I should at least get points for that. And you need to know your audience. If time is everyone's biggest asset, if I can revamp my resume, work with plenty of all these VSOs that are going to help us translate it or go on informational interviews and be completely prepared for an informational interview or whatever, then you are showing them that you are trying to save them time, because you are the one doing the asking ultimately. So I think it's really important that the point you're making essentially is we have to do our part as well. No one wants to hear acronyms. You're exactly right. If there's a private and I'm a captain and the private has a question about, hey sir, how did you get to be a captain? Like, yeah, I'm pretty busy. I would love to talk to you at some point, but it's just not that time.
Right.
So veterans, why and how did you get involved with this? Because I feel like it is an unbelievably altruistic gift that you're giving people. I'm so happy that you're doing it, and I'd love to know more. Like, I just don't see this often, and not at this level. So what was it?
Oh, well, thank you, Rich. Well, I really give a huge amount of credit to Deloitte for doing the core leadership program and for bringing me into it. I got connected with Deloitte in the summer of 2012. Deloitte University, which is where we are right now, had just recently opened, and they had a big event where they brought together a bunch of talent leaders and sort of thinkers in the space. And so I was one of them and came to an event here. And I got to know people at Deloitte. And one of the things that I mentioned is, oh yeah, I have this book coming out next year. It's called Reinventing You. And so I built good relationships with folks, but I think that part of that just stuck in their mind, and they said, oh, reinvention, that's interesting. And so the next year, in 2013, they launched the core leadership program, and they realized, of course, that reinvention was going to be a central tenet of what they were trying to help veterans with. And so they invited me to come do sort of a one-off talk, but it went really well, and so they invited me back, and I have continued to be part of every single core delivery. So we're now up, as we mentioned, I believe it's 21 times, and I'm scheduled to I have a contract with Deloitte running through 2020.
Good.
To keep coming back, which is really amazing.
So that is exactly, it's very serendipitous. Your topic is, or the topic of your first book is exactly what's happening. And we talked earlier about some of our common friends, and Claude Silver, we always do these conversations, and we're in a cab and telling her some of the struggles I had, and she said, it's like you're coming out of the womb. And it is a reinvention. It is a new adoption of a new place and new things and new everything, where I would say literally in the Marine Corps, or not the Marine Corps, the Armed Services, you might not have been safe because of your job, but there was this really good sense of stability. I mean, if you really, unless you did something unbelievable, like, you could have a good career. So you come out and you have to reinvent yourself. And you go over a point where you say three words. And I think that's a really important point to talk about. And I'd like you to explain what the three words are and why you came up with that concept.
Yeah, so one of the things that I suggest in my book, Reinventing You, is just kind of a super quick exercise in getting a handle on how you're perceived by other people. And so the basic idea is that you take about half a dozen friends or colleagues. I mean, certainly it could be more if you want, but I think the minimum effective dose is maybe about 6 people. And you ask them a super simple question, which is, if you had to describe me in only 3 words, what would they be? And the reason that's so useful is it begins to show you patterns of what other people are picking up on about you, so that you can really see what is it that they think is most special, most distinctive, most unique about me. And that gives you a hint or a clue about strengths that you can leverage.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also a chance for some candid feedback. If you need to tone it down in a certain area, or maybe you're aggressive, or maybe your choice of words when it comes to describing admin personnel in the military, pogues is what we say. Like, those people are extremely valuable when they get out. They have a lot of the skills that people want. So I think the 3 words is a great opportunity to focus on what you may not know about yourself. But like you said earlier, like, it shouldn't be a surprise. It shouldn't be a surprise. But so I want to go a little bit further. And as far as reinventing yourself, how do people come to the realization that maybe they need to do a little inward analysis, so to speak, to get to where they want? Sometimes I think we just get in our own way a lot. So what are some indicators, if they're not overt, that you might need to reinvent yourself and your approach?
Yeah, certainly. Well, as you point out, Rich, there's kind of a couple of different circumstances, right? There's certainly plenty of times when we are forced into reinvention. Like, you discover that you've been laid off, or that your job is changing radically, or, hey, guess what? We're moving the entire office to Philadelphia, and you can either come or not. Yep. That's sort of an inflection point where you say, okay, guess I better do that. But there are more subtle instances too. And I think for a lot of people, it's easy to ignore them unless they're staring you in the face. But it's as with a lot of things, if we can learn to be sensitive to the early signs of things, we can save ourselves probably a lot of pain and heartache, and hopefully actually get more of the good stuff by discovering that there's something that we want to be moving toward. So I mean, there's just basic questions, a sort of self-inventory. Are you excited about going to work in the morning?
Exactly.
Is that fun, or is that like, oh God, again?
Yeah. Like, does Monday ruin your week?
Yeah.
I look at it like that. So networking. When I was here, we talked about networking over and over and over. Informational interviews, everyone's like, networking. Everyone talks about a lot of the roles they've landed, networking. How they've moved up in their companies into different roles that they never thought, networking within the company. I hate networking. And I think a lot of people, it just makes them very uncomfortable. But now I feel like I understand. You talk about the wrong way to do it, which is if you and I are friends and Clayton over there and we interact a lot, that's not really kind of networking. What are some tips to kind of take the out of networking, let's just say on LinkedIn, for example? What are some tips you could talk about to make it less awkward for you as a person if you're not used to it?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that have a lot of discomfort around networking, typically because the frame that it often gets talked about in our society is you go meet a person and then they will give you a thing. And it's just like, oh, that sounds weird. And then what do I have to give them? Or do I just like suck up to them? Like, it just feels really fake.
Yeah.
And in fact, research by Francesca Gino at Harvard Business School showed that people literally feel physically dirty after networking if there's somebody who has a kind of an aversion to it. And so what do we do? Well, I think the first thing is reconceptualizing it so we actually get clear on what we're talking about. Because I think that the way that gets talked about, you meet a person and then you extract something from them. I mean, who wouldn't feel dirty about that? That's kind of lousy, and I think it's bad networking. I mean, it might technically fall under the framework of networking, but it's terrible networking. The key, I think, to really understanding it is it's maybe better to use the phrase relationship building.
Yes. Because
almost nobody likes networking, but just about everybody likes making friends.
Yes.
And so if you can say, all right, how is it that I can meet interesting, fun people and then find more ways to spend time with them? That actually sounds like a pretty good thing to do. And so if that's the lens, I mean, if we're coming at it like, who is this person that I want to get something from, we're not going to be in the right space. But if we are just following our interests and we find someone that we click with, and it's like, oh, this person's cool, I want to find out more about what they're doing. I want to find out more about how they got to where they're going. Maybe I'll invite them to lunch. Maybe I'll invite them to my house. Let's build a relationship. I think a big problem in American society is that there's, somehow kind of came in that you need to separate work and friendship, that it's bad to do business with your friends. I completely disagree. Who would you want to do business with but your friends? I mean, why? How terrible to have a life of a bunch of people that are not your friends and you spend 8 or 10 or 12 hours a day with them. That's awful.
Yeah.
No, I mean, if someone is a good friend, then I would do anything with them. I have friends that I've been business partners with, and it just strengthens it. Now the key is there's some people that they may be your friends, and then there's something wrong with them, and they're actually a bad person to do business with, and it's it destroyed the friendship.
Sure.
Fuck yeah, it should destroy the friendship. You don't even want to have that person in your life if they're the kind of person that would screw over a client or that would treat somebody badly or yell at somebody. But the people who are the good people, I would want to do business with them all day long.
I agree. I think one thing you mentioned if you are going into, I want to network with Dorie Clark, and I'm like, Dorie, and I, in my head, am going to ask you for the first 5 minutes of your presentation at every core leadership, and I come in and that's my goal, then it's over already. Because I am going to try to not be a nasty salesman about it. You're going to detect it. You're going to tune me out right away. You'll never remember my name, but it doesn't matter. But if I'm just like, Dorie, your book was huge. My wife has reread it a bunch of times. This specifically was whatever. Or thank you so much for helping veterans. I'm really glad you actually are going to, be on contract till 2020. And that's it. What if that's it? And then I comment on some of your LinkedIn material and you remember me. And then I see you again in 2020. And then maybe by then we've talked 15 times and maybe we do a speaking event together. I think when you rush into it and the intent is not honest and true, you're screwed.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, there's a principle in psychology and sociology that they talk about called the mirror exposure effect. And it's just kind of an interesting thing to keep in mind. Studies have shown again and again that literally, they call it the mirror exposure effect, because if you are merely exposed to someone, if you just see somebody around, if you're exposed to them in a very light way, you are far more likely to form a favorable impression of them. And so I think, to your point, a lot of people want to go in for the kill early with networking, and they'll know you 5 minutes and they'll be like, hey, can you introduce me to this really important person? Hey, can we do this big project together? And you're thinking like, oh my God, I don't even know this person. Like that's intense. But if you can do a sort of light touch where over time you kind of get to know someone and you feel like, oh, okay, well, Rich is a nice guy. I know a little bit about Rich. And then you get to know him, and then you want to know a little bit more about him. And then you build a relationship, and when you have that foundation, then it becomes more natural to be able to suggest doing something together or asking a favor or whatever.
And I think, it's patience. And I think that is one of the most important things I'm going to try and talk about. Is it is a long road. I don't believe in the words like all the YouTube videos, here's 4 secrets to whatever, or this many hacks to this. Like it's not a lot of times. Like that's why it's on YouTube, because it's not a secret. You're just disseminating information. It's very catchy, but it requires an inordinate amount of patience and becoming comfortable in your own skin to interact with people on a normal level. I have done this so much in the last 3 months, and what happens, Dorie, and you could tell me if I'm wrong here, or if you've had a different experience, you build a small relationship, that relationship turns into a friendship, and then those friends want other people to know about you. It's like getting a great haircut. Like, you're obligated to say, like, who got your hair? Like, oh, well, it was so-and-so. You're just giving them business. So is that how you see it as well, where you build those relationships, and then those people, after you've formed one, they want other people to know about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you're really right. What I think more than anything sets successful people apart is their willingness to play the long game.
Yes.
Like, everybody wants like something now, something quick, and you're not going to get very much if you want the thing now, because it hasn't had time to grow and to turn into something. I mean, this is why when you think about sales, for instance, they talk about B2B sales, and it's always, if you're trying to sell somebody whatever, wind turbines, that's not like, oh, I met you at a party and then the next day I'm going to buy a wind turbine from you.
Yeah.
It's like a 2-year or more sales cycle. And a lot of things in life are a 2-year sales cycle or a 5-year sales cycle. I mean, all the time now. I have been speaking professionally, speaking for money, for about 5 years now. And, I mean, since I started my business 12 years ago, I certainly spoke, but it was mostly either for free to promote my business, or maybe they'd give a little bit of money. But I've been speaking like for real money for about 5 years. And you hear sometimes, sometimes people will say, if I don't get, 1 or 2 spin-off gigs out of every talk, it's a failure. I always get that. And I would hear stuff like that, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't get that. Like, am I bad? Like, what is it? And what I've come to realize is, yeah, you do. It just takes a long time. I am starting now. 5 years later, I will get calls, I'll get inbound inquiries, and I'll ask people, how did you hear about me? And be like, I saw you speak at this thing in like 2014. I'm like, oh my God, really now? But that's when it comes up. That's their cycle. And you have to understand that and respect it, and just know that it's a long game, and you have to be patient. And when you are, that patience itself, that diligence, sets up a moat between you and the competition.
I'm reading a book right now by Scott Belsky called The Messy Middle, and are you familiar with it?
I've not read the book, but I'm familiar with Scott.
It's amazing, and he talks about how no one talks about the messy middle. Everyone talks about the beginning of the journey or how you got there. Those are the headlines. Those are what you post, but no one talks about the mind-numbing hours, the amazing successes followed by a terrible fall, and everything else that actually grows you. If you cannot appreciate and have patience for the journey and welcome the failures like we kind of talked about earlier, then I think it's going to be really difficult. And with that, I want to say thank you, because I have to wrap up, unfortunately. But keep in mind that you were let go September 10th, 2001.
Yes.
You were a journalist, and your first book came out when?
My first book came out in April of 2013.
It takes time. It takes time. And what are your other couple books? I know you mentioned it. I just want to make sure I get it so everyone could go look them up. Your 2 other books?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Rich. Thank you. Yes. Hi, everyone. My 2 books are, or my 2 other books. So I have Reinventing You, Stand Out, and Entrepreneurial You. And I'll actually mention, if anyone's interested in a free resource, I have an 88-question Entrepreneurial You self-assessment. And folks can, it's thinking through entrepreneurial thinking and ways of creating multiple income streams in your own life, in your own business. And if that's of interest to you, you can get it for free at dorieclark.com/entrepreneur.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing everyone get your book tonight and you having amazing, life-changing conversations. But I appreciate your time, and hopefully this is the beginning of some good networking.
Love
All
it.
right,
Thank you,
Dorie.
Rich.